we got to talk about Ice Train here. So unfortunately passes away at the age of 56 earlier in the week. DDP was the one who announced it. And if you've never seen Ice Train before, guy was around in WCW from 93 until literally the final days. He was on the second to last Nitro, facing Canyon. I know I talked about that in the Death's Door series I did on this Patreon many years ago about M.I. Smooth and Canyon having a match, and a pretty decent match, pretty fun match as well. And he didn't go over to WWE. He didn't go into developmental. Basically retired from wrestling immediately after WCW went out of business. I think he popped up one more time in Germany sometime a couple of years ago, and that was pretty much it. But longtime WCW guy, did some stuff in Germany as well. Just well known for being just a massive dude with just the biggest arms you've ever seen in your life and the biggest chest you've ever seen in your life. And man, he was a lot of fun. And there's some playlists out there. It's not hard to find Ice Train matches. Going back and watching it, and I don't know if it's just a matter of we don't have guys like Ice Train anymore, or I don't know what it was, but like I in the last couple of years became like a pretty big Ice Train fan, and like I don't know if I would have been a big Ice Train fan in like 1996 or whatever if I was watching WCW, but I don't know what it is. But like these last couple of years, I've become a fan, and going back this week and watching as many Ice Train matches as I can. I kind of like the dude, you know what I mean? He wasn't refined. He's pretty green. He never quite figured it out bell to bell, but man, the dude was a pretty damn good. And we like to come up with the phrase of a dumb jock wrestler. He was a pretty good dumb jock wrestler, man. What do you think of Ice Train?
So you could really break up Ice Train's WCW run into three sort of eras or segments. There was the rookie year in 1993, where they pushed him very hard right out of the gate. And then he went away and went to work for CWA for Otto Wanz in Germany.
And we've always talked about CWA loves their big dudes. They're big barrel-chested guys.
Is perfect. Yeah.
You know what Otto Wanz
This was an Otto Wanz wrestler.
He was like guy right there.
He was
I want
perfect
that man.
You could see why Otto Wanz would kept bringing this guy back and using him. He was perfect for that promotion. But then there was the 96-97 run, which, with the Fire and Ice tag team with Scott Norton, and then the feud with Scott Norton. And then he went away and went back to Germany again. And then you have the third WCW run, his third kind of era with the company, which was, as you alluded to, the M.I. Smooth stuff. And then really that's it for him. He came out of the power plant in 1993, power plant trainee, and they gave him the big push right out of the gate. And the one thing watching Ice Train all week, and there's a great Ice Train playlist on YouTube, which we can link somewhere. I don't remember who uploaded it, but it basically takes you through his entire WCW career through all three of those phases that I talked about. And the one thing I noticed about Ice Train watching through that this week is and I'm hardly the only one to note this, he improved drastically throughout that run.
Mm-hmm.
At the start, he's really, really bad. He's just a big guy. You could see why they put him on TV, because he's got the great look and he's got good charisma. He has a good crowd connection right out of the gate, but his work is terrible. And they do some interesting things to try to disguise that fact that we'll get into as we talk about him. But as his career moves along, he gets better and better. And then, before I watched through his career this week, when I was thinking about Ice Train, it's like what I remembered most was the Fire and Ice tag team and the matches with the Steiners. And I remember those being underrated matches at the time that really newsletter freaks were praising. They were kind of like, I guess, underground favorites of the newsletter readers at the time. And those did hold up. But his work is so much better in that era than it was during his little first run there in 93, when he was pretty rough coming out as a rookie. And I think that those tours with in Germany really helped him a lot to fill in the gaps and flesh out his work. And he's a guy who early in his career, you could tell he didn't know what to do sort of between the moves. You see a lot of wrestlers like that, where it's like,
mm-hmm. he would do like the very
physically
generic, like,
things.
yeah, like go to the crowd and kind of like flex sometimes or whatever, but like did it in a way that,
or he just didn't know what to do next or how to follow up, or there was a lot of emptiness to his work, and that kind of got corrected over time to the point where he was a pretty underrated big man worker by the time he hit his stride. So, and I think I've seen many people this week note how much better he got as his career moved along. And I don't know who made the point, and I wish I can credit them, but I forget. But I was reading something where somebody said he really would have been someone who would have benefited greatly if he were 10 years older and was around for the territories, because he would have went to a bunch of different places. So whoever made that point out, I don't, it's some random thing on Twitter I saw. But anyway, he came in as a rookie in 93, and they pushed him right out of the gate with a long undefeated streak. And he would beat job guys, and he would win like handicap matches and things like that.
Did you watch the arm wrestling match that he had with Vader?
Yes.
Was that was on the video too? And I believe was that in 93 as well, when they were first getting him started?
That would have been on his first run. Yes, because Ventura, those were the
Jesse introduced it, of course. Yes. So and he doesn't win the arm wrestling competition, but he goes all the way to the finals. And he takes Vader to his limit. Like Vader's, just kind of like, I got this in the bag. There's no chance this guy's going to do this. This little young guy, as little new boy, he's not going to do it. And Harley Race is talking shit. And Vader, very quickly, puts his arm nearly down. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, it's an inevitability. Ice Train's going to lose here. And then Ice Train rears back. And this fucking rocks, man. This is such a good, I loved this arm wrestling battle. It was so good. And then Ice Train rears back up. And then he starts getting the advantage. And he's seconds away from putting Vader away. And the crowd just losing their mind. And I thought that Vader was going to push the table over. Just, classic. Anytime there's been an arm wrestling thing since then, it's like the table gets pushed over and we never find out. But then Vader just kind of rallies at the last second and does beat this guy. But I love the idea that, like, he's not going to beat Vader in this arm wrestling thing, but he's going to beat a bunch of other WCW wrestlers, and he's going to go to the finals, and he's going to take Vader to the limit. Now, Vader was a top champion at this time, a top dude, that one of the top
world
heels.
Champion.
Right. So having that symbolism of, hey, this guy took Vader to the limit, it's clear that they had very, very big plan for this guy from day one as well.
Yeah, well, he went undefeated for a long time. They brought him in, and they would have him win handicap matches and beat jobbers. And they paired him up. They knew he was charismatic, but you could tell that they knew that they didn't think he could talk, and that they didn't think he was a great worker yet, because he would work his matches were super short, usually under 2 minutes when he would beat these jobbers, and he would beat him with a power slam. And they paired him up with Thunderbolt Patterson, which was a little odd at the time, because Thunderbolt Patterson was a guy from Georgia from another era. And he had worked, I think, one of those Slamboree Legend matches a few months earlier, and they just kept him around, and they gave him the dreaded babyface manager role, which is never a very good role to be in, a babyface manager. But they paired him up with Ice Train to do Ice Train's promos and to give Ice Train some credibility, even though at that point, I don't know how much Thunderbolt Patterson would have been worth to fans in 1993. It had been many, many years since he had been a star, and in a completely different era of the company. But at any rate, he was with Patterson, and what he would do is Ice Train would win these squash matches, and then they would do the post-match interview with Shivani or whoever, on Worldwide or Pro or one of these, WCWC shows. And the promos, though, were great, because it was almost like a church sermon. Like, Patterson would be like, because they would push in commentary how Patterson was mentoring Ice Train.
Yeah.
And trying to teach him how to be like him. So in the post-match promos, Patterson would always be like, I want to teach you, Ice Train. And Ice Train would be like, I want to learn. He's like, I want to teach you. Yeah. I want to learn. I want to learn, Thunderbolt. I just want to learn, And so these great promos, and you could tell that, like, there was charisma there. He had charisma, and he understood, he understood crowd connection in those things. But they were all exactly the same. Like, they would be like these church sermon promos. And then they paired up Ice Train with Ron Simmons. And at first,
post-world title Ron Simmons, by the way.
Post-world title run. And at first, Patterson was still around. So it would be like Thunderbolt Patterson wasn't Simmons' manager, but he was Ice Train's manager, but he would accompany him to the ring. But then they kind of phased Thunderbolt Patterson out. And they kind of moved the story to Ron Simmons was mentoring Ice Train. And then in the commentary, they would push how Ron Simmons was, like you just said, a former world champion and what a great person to learn from. And now he was Ron Simmons' protege as opposed to Thunderbolt Patterson's protege, which I thought worked better because the modern fan understood Ron Simmons. They liked Ron Simmons. No one knew who Thunderbolt Patterson was by 1993. So he's in this team with Ron Simmons, and they have this match against the Nasty Boys, who were the World Tag Team Champions at the time. And remember, Ice Train is still undefeated at this point. And they're taking the world champs to the limit. Missy Hyatt, who's managing the Nasty Boys, she takes this fake bump outside the ring. Like she falls down, and it catches the attention of Ice Train. So being the nice guy that he is, he goes to see what's wrong with the lady, right? And check on Missy Hyatt. Ron Simmons is in the ring like, what are you doing? He's like trying to make a tag, and Ice Train's not there in the corner anymore. So the Nasty Boys, they roll up Ron Simmons and pin him. And then Missy, reveals that it was all a ruse, and she's laughing at Ice Train. And then Ron Simmons is all mad at him. And then now there's dissension. So that caused friction between Ron Simmons and Ice Train because Ice Train made the rookie mistake of falling for this Jezebel who pretended she was hurt outside the ring. And then they would have these matches where now Teddy Long is in the mix, and now he is Ice Train's mentor, right? And he's trying to make peace between Ice Train and Ron Simmons because he used to manage Ron Simmons as Doom, right? So they have all these different segments where Ice Train is trying to apologize to Ron Simmons. I'll never make that mistake again. Come on, Ron, you got to give me another chance. And Teddy Long pleading with Ron Simmons, you got to give him another chance. You guys can make a great team. And Simmons just isn't sure, And then eventually, Simmons, of course, turns on him. And Simmons is the one that goes heel. And then they have a match at Clash of the Champions in January of 94.
Mm-hmm.
And that ends up being Ice Train's first loss. Ron Simmons beats him at Clash of the Champions 26 in Baton Rouge. And that's Ice Train's first singles loss. And from there, he works for a couple more months, and then he goes on his first little excursion to Germany. So that's kind of like the summation of his first little run in WCW. Big undefeated streak, the trying out different mentors, first Thunderbolt Patterson, then Ron Simmons, and then later on Teddy Long. And then he disappears again for a while. So that was kind of the 93-94 run for Ice Train, which is funny because I did, for Match of the Week, I did Ice Train and Ron Simmons versus the Hollywood Blondes. And the Hollywood Blondes at that point were on the back end of their run. People might not remember this. That's a legendary tag team, but they were only together for like 9 months. Steve Austin and Brian.
Right. Much to the chagrin of both guys involved, who didn't want to do the tag team at the first place, but then when they were together, they were like, all right, we're doing pretty well here. This is kind of working. And then they're like, hey, we're going to break you guys up. And they're like, what the fuck? All right, fine, great. All right.
Yeah.
It's not well known because like in the history that they tell you, it's like these guys were a team forever. Yeah. It was 9 months, it was very, very short amount of time that they were a team.
So what's funny is when they have that match against the Hollywood Blondes, it's taped in July. And it's like one of the first matches Ice Train ever had. He's like a literal rookie straight out of but it didn't air until like a week before Halloween Havoc. Like it didn't air for like 4 or 5 months.
Right. Taped July 9th, so 1993, airs October 16th, 1993.
Yeah. So what's funny is this was like the continuity era of WCW. So at the time the match was taped, in real time, the Hollywood Blondes were the tag team champs in July. By the time the match aired, those titles had changed like 3 times. So, but the company knew that. So the Blondes don't come to the ring with the title belts because they knew that they were going to do title changes. They knew this match wasn't going to air until the end of October, and they knew what the title changes were going to be in the interim. So by the time the match aired, the Hollywood Blondes not only had lost the titles, but the titles had changed like twice more since that point in time. That's how far behind the taping schedules were in WCW in those days. And for people who read the newsletters, we were always able to work out what title changes they were going to do on the pay-per-views and the clashes based on who would show up at these tapings with and without the title belts. Because you'd always get like one smart mark or newsletter reader who would go to the center stage tapings or MGM in Orlando or whatever it was, right? And then they would report back to Meltzer or Keller or whoever else, oh, so-and-so wasn't carrying the title anymore. So, and then you'd be able to work it out. Oh, where they're building towards the title match with this guy, that guy must win, right? Because you would be able to figure it out based on who had the title belts and who didn't at all the tapings. And to keep track of all that continuity and when these matches were going to air, I don't know whose job that was, okay? But they were masters of it because there was almost never slip-ups in the continuity.
No, WWF was the same way too. There's like one or two slip-ups in the entire history of the WCW era, and a lot of times was just like something would happen or a guy would get hurt or whatever. But if everything was good and everybody was pretty well, healthy and under contract still, they nailed it. And it's one of my favorite aspects of old wrestling is the idea that you had to sit down in fucking July and know what you were doing in October to make sure that it made sense for all that time period, that this show isn't going to air for 4 months or whatever, but we need to make sure that everything is airtight and fine. And you have to think as deeply as the Hollywood Blondes versus Ice Train and Ron Simmons. You know what I mean? Like you have to think to that level, what is going to happen? We're going to have this random ass match, but hold on, what do we have to do here to make sure that this match makes sense in October the same way it's going to make sense when we tape it here in July? And I love that aspect of old wrestling.
So they had to come out without their titles, and then that by the time it aired, that was one of the last matches that the Hollywood Blondes had on television. That ended up being one of their final matches. And Ice Train and Ron Simmons won that match. And it's like, that must have meant that they knew that they'd be winding down the run of the Hollywood Blondes by the time October rolled around, because there's no reason that team would have beat them otherwise. But the other thing about that is the finish didn't even air on TV. It was one of those deals where they were like, we're out of time. And we didn't even get to see the finish. So you said that match took place on July 9th.
July 9th.
In real time.
Yep.
And it aired, what was the date you said it aired?
October 16th.
October 16th. So let me walk you through this. Hollywood Blondes lost the titles to Arn Anderson and Paul Roma on August 18th. Anderson and Roma lost the titles to the Nasty Boys on September 19th. Too Cold Scorpio and Bagwell beat the Nasty Boys on October 4th. Then the match aired. There were 3 tag team title changes in between that Hollywood Blondes match with Simmons and Ice Train and by the time it finally aired. 3 other teams held the titles in that time period. And in between all of that, Simmons and Ice Train had a match with the Nasty Boys, which was the first tease of their breakup. And that all had to be plotted out and planned in advance. I mean, this shit is crazy. But this is the same era where you would have just wild stuff like a couple years earlier in 91, where the Freebirds had a negative 6-day tag team title reign because they lost the titles at a taping before they won them at a pay-per-view. That was the extent of how this shit would be plotted out. The Freebirds lost the tag team titles on, here, I'll pull it up for you right here. They lost the titles on a taping to the Steiner brothers on February 18th, 1991. But they didn't win the titles until February 24th, 1991 from Doom at the pay-per-view. But they knew that they were going to have the Steiners beat the Freebirds for the titles before the Freebirds won them from Doom at Wrestle War. So they had the Freebirds drop the titles at the taping 6 days before the pay-per-view. So if anyone was able to follow that, they held the titles for negative 6 days.
Right. So good. Because
then they didn't air the match until whenever the fuck. The Steiner brother match. So it was just a completely different time when it came to that stuff. And it's funny because circling back to Ice Train, he debuted in July in real time, but none of his matches aired until like September and October. So he really didn't debut on TV until September or October, even though he had wrestled like all of July and August doing all of these television tapings for WCW Main Event and Worldwide and Pro and Power Hour, because that's the other thing. People think AEW, they got to get rid of Rampage. There's too many shows. Yeah. WCW had like 6 shows.
Yeah.
They had like, and they had They had two versions. Like WCW Pro alone had two different versions.
Right. There was a Chicago version. Yeah, there was a Chicago WCW
and a New York
Pro.
Version.
Right.
Yeah. And the Chicago version had Shivani and either Ventura or no, Shivani and Zbyszko hosted the Chicago version of the show, and Jim Ross and Paul E. Dangerously hosted the New York version of WCW Pro. And they would have like the same matches, but like Shivani during the matches would push cards that were coming up in the Midwest and in Chicago. And on the New York version of the show, Jim Ross would push the shows that were coming to the Meadowlands and the places in the Northeast, and they would have like different inset promos and different segments. Like Paulie Dangerously would have a Danger Zone segment that was like centered around New York culture.
Right.
The Chicago show would have
Jack Brickhouse, fucking 84-year-old Jack
yeah.
Brickhouse talking about the wrestling. So
and with all these different shows, Pro, Power Hour, Main Event, Worldwide, all this shit,
Saturday
night and all these shows, they had at least 5 or 6 shows. The continuity would have to be, it was someone's job to keep track of all this shit and make sure that the right guy was wearing the world television title. It's just, when you look back at it, it's like how
well, and now they can't,
crazy
like,
was
it seems like wrestling companies can't do fucking anything right these days. You know what I mean? They're just constantly, things are fucked up. And it's like, man, and this wasn't a WCW thing exclusively as well. In the 90s, God damn, at one point WWF, I think, well, in the 80s, of course, they had All American Wrestling, Tuesday Night Titans, Primetime, Superstars, Challenge, Main Event. And then I grew up in the era of Mania, Action Zone, Sunday Night Slam, then later Livewire. And then I grew up in the era of, Shotgun Saturday Night and Sunday Night Heat. And they had some Friday night thing too. It was just like, yeah, they had Superstars, Livewire, Action Zone. I mean, there was always these different shows on here. And again, like all those things had to be, I'm covering it right now in the Brett vs. Owen series, that a lot of this stuff has very weird timelines, because it's like, okay, like they're doing this heel turn, but like they would go to a town and Owen would be, a babyface in this town, but had already turned heel on pay-per-view or whatever. It was, or like the opposite, the other way around, where he would be, still it was just, yeah, it's wild. And I detail it all in the Brett vs. Owen series. There's too many instances of it where I do that, but they had to make sure while they're doing this heel turn that things are being filmed in, at the right time. And you have this thing with the Quebecers losing the titles to Marty Jannetty 1-2-3 Kid, and how you handle that on house shows and Mania and things that were taped, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks prior or whatever, trying to figure that out and maneuver it all around this guy's heel turn or whatever is nuts. And it's why, but they nail it. They nail it in the end. It's just a matter of kind of piecing it all together once you're watching. And for the viewer at home, you have no idea. If you were just a normal random viewer, you would have no idea the stuff that was going on behind the scenes to create, this stuff and put it all together and make it all work. And but for newsletter, readers and reporters, and then obviously us now going back and looking at this, it just blows your mind how they could get this all together and make it all make sense. But they did. Somehow they did.
Yeah. So, anyway, back to Ice Train. So he goes away to Germany for a while, and then he comes back and has the run in 96 to 97, which that's the run that people remember because he had the match against Scott Norton on TV and they had a time limit draw. And the idea was, in fact, that might've been the match where he returned from Germany. And the idea was, well, these guys are so evenly matched and, neither guy can have the advantage over the other, so they ended up becoming a tag team.
It's so good, too, because they clothesline each other because they're just massive men with big barrel chests and big arms, and they're both knocked out because they've met their match. It's like, oh, my God, I'm going to hit you with my big chest and my big arm. Oh, wait, I'm going to hit you with my big chest and my big arm. And they both knock themselves out, and they stand up, and they're like, wait a minute, hold on a second. It's like the Spider-Man meme, you know what I mean? They're like, wait a minute, what if
they're mirror images?
You and me, we could... what if we do this? And they do it.
Yeah. So then that's around the time. So they come together as a team, and then they have those matches with the Steiners that I was talking about earlier. And then
those matches are legit good, by the way. Like legit good.
Yeah, yeah. And then they break up. And don't they redo the shit with Teddy Long they did with Ron Simmons? Isn't that how the breakup? Or was there someone else involved in that?
No, I think you're right. No, it was Teddy Long that was involved. Yeah, I forget exactly all the details of the breakup, but essentially they were going to move Scott Norton over to the NWO or whatever, so they broke them up. And yeah, I want to say Teddy Long was involved or whatnot, but I forget. I remember more that it was just kind of, I think that the team still had some legs to it, but I do know that they obviously thought Norton would probably, specifically Norton, they thought could do more things. So they kind of moved him over and out and into the NWO, and then very quickly he was just teaming with Buff Bagwell instead. So I don't know. I feel like that would have been better with the other stuff.
I think I remember Teddy Long being involved in
so now I think if I remember the timeline right, I don't know if Teddy Long was involved in the breakup of the tag team as much as he was involved in once Ice Train was back by himself. Teddy Long came back and managed him for a little bit.
Okay. Because I feel like they almost repeated the same story they did with Simmons, where it's like they were at odds and it was obvious which guy was going to go heel and which was going to go face. And I thought Teddy Long was involved both times.
Yeah, that I don't remember. That I don't remember. I do know they faced the Rock and Roll Express, and that was a match that caused a lot of the dissension. I know I was seeing that one.
Yeah, they lost that match.
Right.
Yeah, that was after. Well, that was in the midst of the feud with the Steiner brothers.
Correct.
Right, because they had a bunch of matches with the Steiners where they were just, those two teams were just perfect fits for each other's style.
Just a type of matches you just don't see anymore, man. None of those matches exist anymore because none of these wrestlers exist anymore. The bell rings and they're just snorting at each other and just sweating and just big dudes throwing each other around and dropping each other on their head and flexing and stuff. That shit doesn't happen anymore, man.
But then Ice Train and Scott Norton had a singles feud that lasted a while because they faced each other on a bunch of different pay-per-views, right? I know Hog Wild for sure.
Yeah.
And which was, I mean, those pay-per-views, Eric Bischoff, let's have a pay-per-view at a biker rally in front of people who aren't fans, who aren't going to pop properly and not know what's happening. And yeah, no, and it's free and it just,
but I get to ride my motorcycle to Sturgis as a business expense.
Yeah.
So. We've always said he's smart. We've never said he's not smart. He's a terrible business person, but we've never said he's not smart. He got WCW to pay him for him and his buddies to ride their hogs out to fucking Sturgis to put on a show that they made absolutely no money from.
Yeah.
It's genius. So, it's great.
So yeah, he feuds with Scott Norton, and I guess they had a match at Fall Brawl.
Fall Brawl, yeah, I'm looking at this right now. Fall Brawl won on WCW Pro, and then is that it? I swear
that's the blow off.
Oh, because then obviously the first one was the Hog Wild.
Fall Brawl is the blow off.
Right.
Fall Brawl is the blow off to the feud, and then like you said, Scott Norton probably at that point ends up in the NWO or whatever.
Yeah, I think almost immediately after he's in the NWO.
And honestly, as far as Ice Train goes, that's it for like being pushed in WCW, because they really don't do anything with him after that feud. He has like a bunch of cool TV matches. He's got the infamous match with La Parka that everyone was talking about this week, which is a shockingly good match that a lot of people forgot about. And then he goes back to Germany again, at some point in 1997. And then, we don't see him again for a while until he comes back in the dying days of WCW. And that's when he converted to the M.I. Smooth gimmick, which that era is not my wheelhouse. So you're going to have to jump in.
Yeah. Here. Well, so he was part of the New Blood when they were doing the another genius. Let's talk about geniuses here. Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff, they decided to come back to WCW in April of 2000, and they're going to put their minds together. So Vince Russo obviously was there at the end of 1999 after Eric Bischoff got ousted. Vince Russo comes in. It's an absolute disaster, his run as the creative force of WCW. They say, hey, you're going to have to work on a committee. He says, no, I'm not doing a committee. And then he leaves. And then they kind of book, without him. I think Kevin Sullivan takes back, most of the power in early 2000. And then by April of 2000, they're like, wait a minute, we got it. We're going to combine you, Vince Russo, and you, Eric Bischoff. And this is going to work out great. It's two great wrestling minds that are going to come together and get WCW back on track. And they come together and they decide, we got the best idea ever. We're going to do the young versus the old, the New Blood versus the Millionaires Club. So you have the Millionaires Club, these old guys that have just been holding on to the spots and aren't giving the young guys any other, any credit. They're not putting them over. They're not letting them be in main events. They're not letting the new generation of WCW thrive and grow and get to where they're going to get to. And then you have the young and hungry new generation of WCW who is ready to prove themselves and sick of the old guys holding them down and taking all the spots and making all the money and driving this company into the fucking ground. Joe, who was the babyface and who are the heels in this situation?
I'm guessing it's not the way people think that.
No, it's not the way anybody on earth would fucking think about it. Yes, the Millionaires Club, the old guys, the old millionaires are your baby faces, and the young and hungry new blood are your heels. Because yes, geniuses. So M.I. Smooth was part of the new blood. He was the Cat Ernest Miller's limo driver. M.I. Smooth, the limo driver. Now, what he would do is, do you remember Just Joe in WWF? Nobody remembers Just Joe.
Yeah, of course.
Do you remember
Just
Joe? Yeah. Okay, so for people that don't remember Just Joe, which Joe knows Just Joe, but most people don't know Just Joe was a guy that was very briefly in the WWF, and his gimmick was that he would be like backstage while two wrestlers were having an argument or whatever, and they would turn to him and be like, "Hey, what'd you hear about that conversation?" He's like, "Hey, I'm Just Joe." That's essentially what the gimmick was every time.
But the thing was, he was like a rumor mongerer.
Yes, but then he would pass those rumors along. Then he would say, "Hey, I heard that Gold Dust and this guy were fighting or whatever."
A shit stirrer.
Right, and then like the next day, he'd be in the background and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, I'm Just Joe." It's like that was the whole.
I don't
gimmick.
know nothing. I'm Just Joe.
Right.
But really, he's the one stirring the pot.
Right, right.
This is Joe E. Legend, by the way,
right.
who people might know him better from other places, but he had that brief run as Just Joe.
So that's kind of what M.I. Smooth was. He was like the limo driver. So like the Cat would be doing something devious, and the M.I. Smooth would like pull down the the separator in the limo and be listening into what the Cat was doing, and that's essentially it. I mean, nothing else happened really. It was he would wrestle occasionally. One time he beat all of the young dragons, Jamie San, Kaz Hayashi, Jimmy Wang Yang. I think it was just Yang at that time. He'd have some hardcore matches here and there, and then pretty much nothing. And then he went away, and then, like I said, he came back at the dying days of WCW, like literally the absolute dying days of WCW. He was on the second to last Nitro, and I think the Final Thunder. I want to say he was on the Final Thunder. He was involved in the feud between the it was like, God, what the Magnificent Eight or whatever the fuck they were called. He was still with the Cat, but yeah, he was feuding with, God, what the hell was the name of that group? Let me try to get it here. Man, what the heck?
With what
Magnificent
guys?
Seven. Yeah, it was like the final, it was Ric Flair, Rick Steiner, Road Warrior Animal, Scott Steiner, Lex Luger, Jeff Jarrett, and Buff Bagwell. And the idea was they were one by one taking out all the top baby faces in WCW, because this is Eric Bischoff's idea as well, as he was starting to gain back power, or potentially power, of WCW. Was, okay, we're going to take everybody away, and then little by little, one by one, we're going to bring everybody back. And that's how WCW is going to kind of come back. Well, they died and nobody came back. So, yeah, he was part of the feud with the Magnificent Seven. He was on the babyface side. But essentially, they had just released like everybody on the roster. I mean, very few people were still being employed by that company at that point. So I think they were just like, you know what? Let's throw a bone to M.I. Smooth here. So he had a couple matches in the final few. The second to last Nitro, and I believe the Final Thunder. And that was it for his WCW run.
Yeah, he the thing is, when I went back, and I had no recollection of M.I. Smooth. I didn't remember that even ever existing. As far as I was concerned, as far as my memories were concerned, Ice Train's run ended in 97. So when I went back and watched that stuff, there really wasn't anything I can glean from it anyway, because WCW at that time, the matches were all like 30 seconds long. Like it was just, so it's like, I don't know. You couldn't really judge his work or really anything.
No, every match, somebody was going to run in 12 seconds and some bullshit was going to happen that didn't matter. There's a fun Goldberg M.I. Smooth match though. If you're into Goldberg destroying guys and beating people up, you got that. But yeah, otherwise there wasn't much. So
really, to me, he peaked in that 96, 97, really right after the formation of Fire and Ice, and then the breakup. And then the stuff he did afterwards with all the TV matches, when he really didn't have any direction or push, but they would have him on TV all of the time. And that's where you really saw his growth as a worker, versus that first run in 93, where there wasn't much there. And they knew it, which is why they tried to, hide him in the tag team with Ron Simmons. And once he lost to Simmons, they really couldn't figure out what to do with him. it's kind of like the story of his career there. You know, they built to the Ron Simmons feud. That was a whole long-term deal, and they built to it, and they had to blow off, and then didn't know what to do with Ice Train. And they did the same thing with Scott Norton. Like they had this story to put the team together, and then the team did, you know, really good work for a few months. They built to the breakup. They had a feud over a number of months, and then when they blew off the feud, they didn't know what to do with Ice Train again. Like they just didn't know what to do with the guy once his big feud ran its course, you know, and then that would be it for him. And usually he would just go back to Germany and come back refreshed. People hadn't seen him in a while. And then you would just rinse, repeat, and start the whole process over again. But then once WCW folded, that was the end of Ice Train. We never saw the guy again. So his career effectively ended in 2001. So that would have been 23 years ago, and that would have made him 33 years old. The guy never wrestled again after the age of 33.
That is the part that blew my mind. When they said 56 years old, I was like, well, that can't be right. He's got to be 65. There must be an error here. And I was like, Jesus Christ, he was 56 years. That guy was wrestling in his 20s. You know what I mean? When he was, it's wild. Yeah, I guess I didn't realize how young he was at that time. So it makes sense why he was still green as hell. He was very lightly trained and super, super young and thrown onto, you know, major television. Given that, he's better than I thought he'd be. You know what I mean? Like when you look at all that, it's like, holy crap, he's actually probably exceeded what he should have been able to do at that age with that amount of training and that little of training, especially in the power plant, which wasn't exactly churning out 5-star workers in the power plant, but they were churning out big muscle heads, and I do kind of appreciate that a little bit. You know, no Kenny Chaoses in today's wrestling anymore. No fire,
Max Muscle, right?
no Max Muscles. Yeah, no Ice Trains. I mean that's. That there was one thing that the power plant was good at, and it was, you know, generic big muscle dudes. But you know what? I could take a little bit of that anymore. I was watching that arm wrestling match between Vader and Ice Train, and imagining like, who are you gonna do that with these days? You know?
Well, luckily no one, because I couldn't stand arm wrestling matches when I was a kid. Like whenever
that one was good though. That one was good shit though.
I that was one of my least favorite gimmicks when guys would do arm. Like, do you remember?
But they're big, strong guys. Joe, they're strong. Are you not following how strong these men are? They're big.
People used to really pop for that shit. A now defunct Observer Award was strongest wrestler.
Right.
You remember that?
Yeah, of course.
Like in the 80s, like it'd be like.
I love the idea that you have to vote for that too. You're like, well, actually, I personally, I think it's, you know, blank or whatever. That's a great award.
Well, because those used to be discussion points in the newsletters. It'd be like, oh, did you see Animal press slam Dr. Death over his head? Wow, the strength that like that was a thing people talked about a lot. Like the strength, especially Meltzer, because he was always into bodybuilding.
Yeah, he was in the bodybuilding world. Yeah,
into that culture and everything. So, and obviously as the preeminent sheet writer of the time, you know, he would write about how strong guys were. And
I have all the award winners, by the way. Whenever you're ready, the strongest wrestler award winners of all time. So
it used to be a big thing where Meltzer would talk about how much guys could bench press. You know, he'd be like, oh, so-and-so bench pressed 480 pounds, but he did 10 reps and he did it without a belt. And I mean, you know, like he would always talk about that shit. So that would trickle down. And then, you know, the newsletter fan, it just became a thing. Like that faded away. I don't know at what point, but people stopped talking about who the strongest wrestlers were. But who won the strongest wrestler awards?
All right, so 1981 was Tony Atlas. Tony Atlas, your 1981 strongest wrestler award winner. 1982, Ken Patera. It seems like a good one. He was a competitive bodybuilder.
In 92?
82. Did I say 92?
I was going to say that. Yeah, it can't be.
I bet in 92, Patera could still put some weight up, but no, 82. 82 for Ken Patera.
81 for Atlas.
81 for Atlas, yeah. 19. Well, do you remember Tony Atlas?
Patera at that time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ken Patera at that time was doing strongman contests.
Right.
And his brother was Jack Patera, head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. And Ken Patera at that time, now it sounds like I'm doing Observer Live or Observer Radio. And Ken Patera would be in those World's Strongest Man competitions that they used to replay on ESPN. He never did well, though. He'd always finish like 9th out of 10 guys.
And snapped his leg in one of them, too, if I remember correctly. He put up some weight and just his leg just went the other way, and it's not good.
It would always be some guy from like Finland, Magnusson, or like they always had names like that would win those things. It would never be like, they'd always have a token American like Ken Patera or maybe like a boxer or something, and those guys would would never do particularly well. Anyway, who else won this Dopey Award?
Yeah, I used to watch all those things, those strongman competitions. We should just watch those. Those are better than
the guys that would win would they always be Vikings. From Norway
the one guy that I always remember, he was Icelandic, was Magnus Ver Magnusson. That dude won all the time.
That's probably the guy I was thinking of.
Right, Magnus Ver Magnusson. Yeah, that guy was incredible.
Little tiny head, gigantic body.
Yeah, just like lifts stones over his head like they're nothing. It's just great.
Yeah.
1983, Hulk Hogan wins the Strongest Wrestler Award. Their 1984, Butch Reed, back-to-back years for Road Warrior Animal in 85 and 86. And then Dr. Death Steve Williams gets it 4 years in a row, 87, 88, 89, 90, and it is retired after 1990.